Hello and welcome to Deprogrammed with Keri Smith. I am your host, Keri. If you are new here, this is a brand new channel. So if the algorithm directed you here, this is a new channel. Make sure you hit like and subscribe and do all the things. I'm very excited today because my guest is Mark Ousley. He is a choir director and an education advocate. And I brought him here today to continue the conversation in a way, to continue the conversation I was having with Deb Philman last week about the current state of education, about woke infiltration into the classroom, and possible solutions for parents. So welcome, Mark.
Hello. Hello. Thanks. Thanks for having me here, Keri.
Thank you for telling me how to pronounce your last name. Owl like an owl. Owsley like an owl.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's it. It's or Housley without an H. Whatever. As long as you get it in there, it's good. Cool. So, thanks.
So, for anyone who may not be familiar with you or your work, can you tell people just a little bit about yourself, where they can find you online, and what it is that you do?
Yeah. I'm a music educator. I've been teaching since 2009, and I'm certified and all of that. But I've been at the University of Oklahoma for the past 4 years. COVID messes with your mind in terms of timeline.
Yes.
But graduate student doing a doctorate, and faced what was president at OU during the kind of critical turn, the big critical turn at OU that was public. Now it's been going on for literally decades, but after that, but I kind of ran into this really earnestly and a lot after the George Floyd incident, and then my advocacy on behalf of or against what's going on at the university that's trickling into schools began when our mayor here, who just lost re-election yesterday, defunded the police, and so I got connected with the governor of Oklahoma and the secretary of state. I was the first person to really brief him on critical race theory here in Oklahoma. And this is in the early 2021. And that led to a lot of work by a lot of great people to pass the anti-CRT bill here, the House Bill 1775. And really have just been pounding the pavement, trying to get people to understand what this is, that, this ideology and this whole postmodern Marxist cocktail is the reason for Defund the Police.
Yeah.
And the goals of Defund the Police may not be exactly what they appear to be. And so
that's the truth with a lot of this ideology is it is not what it appears to be. It's not how it sells itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not just how it sells itself, but even you think, okay, defund the police, right? That means they want less police. I don't believe that was the goal. They want just as many police. They just don't want them to be your police. They want them to be their police. And so that's kind of what I started telling the leaders here in Norman, that, hey, it's not just about back the blue. That's great. We need to do that. But it's about cleansing all governmental institutions of any dissent. Mm-hmm. And defund the police was a way to do that.
And that's the way they're doing it. Yes.
Yeah. So the goal of Defund the Police was not to make there be less police. It wasn't to say, okay, we want to have less security on the streets. It was to rid the most well-funded, most powerful department of the city of people who disagree with the DEI ideology, because that's the first thing they did after the Defund the Police vote, was they used that to legitimize a DEI office in the police department and in the city. Yes. Which then all of your older police retired. All of the ones who really disagreed left, went to, other departments, or just left the profession altogether. Then she institutes a DEI office, and they are involved in the hiring of the police that are coming in now. So
I want to underline this for anyone listening, not just parents. This is how they do this step-by-step process. I'm in a group here in my small little town, social justice group, and they are I don't know why they haven't kicked me out yet, but they are open about this. They have a step-by-step process. They start oftentimes by bringing in a DIE trainer. So they just say, we want to see if we have problems with systemic racism or sexism and homophobia. We're going to bring in a trainer who's going to do an evaluation of the city council or the school district or the school or the police. So they bring in the trainer first, and they will say in this group I'm in, they say, we have to get the trainer in first. Then the trainer will recommend that we create a DEI committee because we have so many problems, we have to deal with it. Then they create the committee. Now the committee is suddenly, this ideological committee is suddenly running your school district or your school or your police department or your city council. You can't let them bring that trainer in. This is the point of me saying this. That's where it starts.
Well, and if you see this, it's all of these are little incubators and test sites for Kendi's DOA, the Department of Anti-Racism. That DOA is just a giant federal fourth branch DEI office. That's what the DEI office has become in every institution they enter. You see that at whether it's universities, businesses, cities, it doesn't matter. So if your listeners don't know, Kendi wrote an article for Politico basically saying we need a fourth branch of government. That government needs to be the Department of Anti-Racism. It shall have no checks and balances. It shall overrule anything and can fire anybody and overrule any policy at any level. So that is how DEI functions in every school or institution that it touches. And that's why my big push, especially for the last year and a half, has been defund DEI. Because it must be, especially when you're talking about schools, right? And you can see this directly at the University of Oklahoma. It takes over all bureaucratic administrative apparatuses, not necessarily directly. It tries to, and the longer it's there, it will. But it's first institutes fear. And it says, if you dissent, we're going to find a way to get rid of you. And that's what's been happening with teachers all across Oklahoma still, even though we've passed the anti-CRT bill, because people in their minds have said, well, diversity, equity, inclusion, good. Critical race theory, bad, but DEI, good. And my message is no, there's DEI ideology, theory, and then there's praxis, or CRT ideology, and then there's CRT praxis, which is DEI. It is the division of ideological enforcement, is what I call it. And so,
let's stop there for a second, because this is coming up with parents all the time, and this is in letters to the editor, to even in my small town paper. There are people pushing this crap who, as you know, they like to say, well, CRT isn't in the classroom or DEI isn't in the classroom. Can you explain the difference between theory and praxis?
Theory, I mean, the theory of it is the philosophical undergirding, right? So it's, okay, here are our tenets, and this is for anything really, but critical race theory has a specific theory and praxis. It says it. All of the scholars talk about it. And, I'm not going to say this any better than James Lindsay but from a teacher standpoint, what that means, what they tell you to do in Oklahoma, Norman Public Schools, for example, she did there was a DEI, their DEI director did a online training during COVID, which is great because you can literally see everything that they're talking about. And what she says is that this is not optional, and it can't be in addition to, it must be embedded in everything you do. And those are direct quotes. So it's the understanding that, okay, the theory of, it's basically power versus oppression, or, power and oppression. If you are oppressed and marginalized, you are to be artificially raised to positions of power, right? And actually they outlined 7 steps in this training in Norman Public Schools, which it's 8. And number 7 is, it requires people who are historically marginalized or in an historically oppressive group to give up their position of power. for those otherwise historically marginalized. Now, that is the praxis, right? That's the work that they talk about. And the theory is, I mean, it goes all the way back to, you know, the 60s and right after. But
this point though is for parents, I think all you need to know about it is the theory would be them sitting down with your kindergartner and saying, this is critical race theory. Let me teach you about it. They're not doing that. What they're doing is worse. They're doing praxis, which is praxis is taking the theory and implementing it.
Right.
They are putting it in the classroom. They're not even telling the kids this is CRT. That's even worse.
No. Well, and then more importantly, they're not telling the parents it's CRT. But here's ways they put it in praxis, right? In Norman Public Schools, they have what they call equity walks. Okay, now this isn't like a privilege walk. This is direct enforcement and intimidation of teachers via the DEI committees and really their spies, their teacher spies that are in every school. And so what they do is they have these teachers walk around the school for their equity walk and check every teacher's walls, their materials, and their, lesson plans, but especially everything that's visible. And if there isn't enough critical race theory inspired decorations on the wall, right, then they will then practice telling, they will then enforce that ideology by saying you need more of this, this, and this in order to be, not racist. And that's the issue. I think I call them the three pillars. There are three pillars of critical race theory, or the work. Let's just talk about, because the praxis is the work as they talk about it. There's critical race theory, which is the ideology. That's the undergirding. There's anti-racism, which Kendi explicitly defines that in terms of public policy, right? So when he says, you either support anti-racist policies as an anti-racist, or you're a racist. That's your dichotomous choice. And that is predicated in your support of whatever policy he deems to be anti-racist. And that's usually a policy based around the redistribution of either wealth or materials and or power, right? To not even, and this is where it gets crazy or a little bit hard to understand, is it's really not about color or gender or anything like that. It's about what you think. It's like
ideology.
Right. That's where the theory's at, right? It's like I talked about this on Twitter yesterday. I think it was Politico that came out and called the Supreme Court Justice Jackson Brown the first Black Supreme Court Justice. And people are like, well, how could they get this wrong? And I'm like, yeah, I don't think they got it wrong. What they're intentionally lying to get the ignorant people who don't know history and to think that that's the case, so they're on the right side of history, right? But there's also what Nicole Hannah-Jones refers to as the Black voice, which is being politically Black. And if you think of it through that lens, then the headline isn't false. It's true when it comes to the theory of what they're talking about, because she may be the first outwardly Marxist or identity Marxist CRT thinker on the court. That's something they could make a case for. And so that's what's very difficult for parents to understand. And so what I've been trying to do is simplify it. Is if there is DEI, there is critical race theory, there's gender theory, there's queer theory, there's all of the things that embed around that. And and that's what I have been frustrated with, especially in red states like Oklahoma, who's doing a great job. The governor's doing good things. Secretary of Education is doing good things, but they're hesitant to take on DEI. And they don't understand that if they don't, it's over. If they don't take it on directly and call it out for what it is and not be afraid to be called a racist, because it's going to call you a racist eventually anyway.
Yes.
That's what you got to understand too.
You're exactly right. So the way I've viewed it as what's happening is that because they hide behind all these different names, and they'll come up with new names. They come up with new. I was in social justice for 20 years. They're always coining new terms. They're always redefining old terms. They control your thoughts by controlling the language, and
Tower of Babel.
Yes, it's Tower of Babel. That's a great reference. They will continually come up with new terms if one becomes toxic for them. So, for example, Christopher Rufo, James Lindsay, a lot of people have done a great job of singling out the critical race theory and pointing out what's wrong with it to such a degree that they now consider that term toxic. So much so that they want to pretend like it's not in the schools. They want to get away from that term. So now what do they hide behind? DEI. It's the same crap. You're exactly right. It's the same crap. And if DEI, if we successfully turn that term toxic, which it should be because it is a toxic ideology, they will go to another one. It's like they'll keep coming up with new terms, and the terms themselves, as you're saying, people shouldn't be afraid of them. They pick terms like, Mark, have you ever read George Lakoff's Don't Think of an Elephant? Do you know that book? So this is a really short book. It was written by George Lakoff, was a linguist, and he wrote this book. It was actually for leftists. He was on the left. He wrote it for leftists to better understand people on the right and how it is that they could discard facts if the facts don't fit with their belief system. His blind spot was that works the other way too. But one of his points was that at the time when he wrote this, he felt, and maybe he was right, that people on the right were better at naming things, these Orwellian terms, so that you were afraid to oppose them. So like No Child Left Behind, for example. He's like, who wants to oppose that? It's called No Child Left Behind. And the left has gotten really great at that now. And so they'll name it diversity, inclusion, and equity because they know that you're afraid to oppose something like that. It sounds good. It sounds
good. Well, and I'll tell you, I'm a conservative leaning person, but I'm an independent, and I see the same thing in here in Oklahoma when it comes to the school choice debate. Okay. And just as an example of how it can be used still by the right to push something that's not necessarily what they're billing it to be. Now, they aren't as overt and they won't explicitly lie about it. What they do is they have talking points. Most of the time it's like, here's school choice. Now, school choice, we define it this way and it's only this bill. And it has to be this bill, otherwise you're against us. And that just smacks me in the face and goes, well, am I racist or anti-racist? I don't have an in-between here, right? It's either school choice or anti-school choice. Well, if you're defining what school choice is, and it can only be as you define it, that leads me to believe that there's an ulterior motive here, and I need to look at the details, right? Because that's what we're missing is the nuance. And that's what language is nuance, right? In terms of context, right? You know, there and there and there and there, right? There are 4 different theres, but the context determines how you spell it, how you use it, all of those things. And that's what they weaponize, you know, you're exactly right. But here is going back to DEI and how they will change the name. Vivek Ramaswamy, I don't know if you read his book, Woke Inc., but it's great. You should read it. But he talks about the managerial class. Okay. And what we can understand about DEI that would help us avoid falling for the name change when they go DEIB or BEID or whatever they're going to change it to is we have to put a prohibition on especially state-funded political offices. That's what it is. It is a state-funded political office. And James Lindsay is calling them their commissars. It's a Soviet-style ideological enforcement. And understanding that anyone who seeks to reach into your classroom and embed what they're talking about into your subject matter as a teacher or an administrator or anything like that, that should be explicitly ripped out. And so if there's any office whom that is their only goal, then I think legislation can be crafted and to defund those offices on a state level, to make them politically or legally illegal. You know, sorry, but it's to make them illegal, to say you cannot push an explicit political ideology here. And you see that being referenced in all the books and the things that are going on the walls for these equity walks, because the teachers coming out of the Social Justices College of Education, that's the big issue. It's not going to be in the curriculum. They're too smart for that. It's a personnel issue. And they can take these small little nuggets of things that are implanted into lesson plans and materials and immediately turn those critical, you know, and that's what DEI is there to push every teacher to do, is to say, okay, put on your lenses. Now, give them critical race theory. This is praxis. You know, put on your lens and teach those kids how to put on their lenses.
Yes. That's what happened to me. Fortunately, it didn't happen to me until college. Now it's happening to kids in K through 12. But I didn't receive the lens. I didn't get this ideology until the late 90s when I was at university. And it teaches you, as you said, it is a belief system. It is an ideology. It says this is the best way to look at the world. And every day you pick up these glasses, these social justice glasses, these DEI glasses, and you're looking at the world through this lens that tells you the best way to look at the world is as a competition for power between these competing identity groups. And we have to redistribute the power so everyone's equal. And so everything, that's what they're teaching these kids is right. As you said, put on your glasses.
Well, and you have to do it in order to do good and be good. It's a weaponization of empathy, right?
Yes.
They weaponize empathy against the person, because here's the thing, unreciprocated empathy is not a virtue. It's abuse. You know, because empathy innately needs to be in good faith, right? So if I'm giving you empathy and I'm exhibiting empathy towards you. Now, there may be points where you need it and I don't, but to say that because of the color of your skin, your ID, your gender, or whatever it may be, that you deserve empathy and I don't, that's innately inequitable. Right. And so that's discrimination in practice. And so it's the way that, and all this gets very complicated, especially when you're talking to parents. Right. And I've learned this over the course of time, that you have to not dumb it down, but you have to give them, okay, what do I have to go after? Because I'm working 3 jobs, or, you know, I'm doing actual life here. And I, at one point, trusted my school to impart to my children the basics of life that would make them successful moving forward. That's what I pay tax dollars for, right? But then they're seeing that something's wrong, but they don't have time like you and I may have sometimes to go in and just, okay, I'm going to read Foucault and I'm going to read James Lindsay and I'm going to read all these things. No, if you have a DEI office, it must be removed. If you don't remove it, we're going to be putting out small fires in perpetuity.
Forever.
Right. And it's a business model, you know, and when we talk about how that relates to universities. So the University of Oklahoma is, unbeknownst to almost anyone, the epicenter for CRT DEI professional development in the country.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, nobody does. It's a very well kept secret, except for the 100,000 diversity officers that are part of this organization. It's called NCORE. NCORE is the acronym. And because I'm trying to think of the actual words that make up that acronym, I can't right now. But
it's a bunch of bullshit, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah. So in 2021, for example, their keynote speaker was Kimberly Crenshaw in July of 2021. But what they do is they run conventions, just like, you know, if you have a teachers convention, you all get together and you do professional development, right? And one of the recent professional developments they did was, you know, queer theory in education and its support of white supremacy. Now imagine that talk just for a second, that intersectional kaleidoscope of, you know, crap. That it's almost, you can't watch it, but the point of the talk was to influence teachers to understand that they are a part of racism and, bigotry against queer people. So therefore, embed more of this stuff in your classroom. That's always what it is. Embed more of this in your classroom. Are you doing the work?
Doing the work.
Because if you're not, you're not good. Mm-hmm. And that's all DEI is there to do. It's very
much like, imagine if anyone's having trouble grasping this concept of it being a commissar or, an office of ideological instruction that does not belong in the classroom. It would be like if there, instead of a DEI committee at your school that's determining what goes into the curriculum, if you had a Christian committee at a public school, if you had a Muslim committee, if you had any other religion or belief system that was there saying everything we teach, including math and science, is going to be through the lens of our belief system. That's what this is. It's wrong.
Well, and here's the practical aspect of it too. When you're talking about the university, we always talk about the lowering of standards, but the increase and spread of this encourages a systemic lack of standards, because it takes almost no standards to write one of these papers and get published. So what you find is, let me just use music education, for example, right? There's a whole host of some of them are great musicians, some of them are not, but there's this influx of scholars in music education that are writing 60, 70, 80 papers a year, doing 60, 70 presentations at whatever on these topics. And if you were really even James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian, when they did the hoax papers, right? They still had to take time to write a decent paper at that point. It's gone way past that now, right? Or at least you can get these, if you use the right keywords, put them in the right order, and then add in your subject matter words, you could just sit and just copy and paste the whole time and get these published. And then all of a sudden at 32 new doctorate, you've got 60 published papers, and you're getting tenure track instruction jobs at universities, usually teaching teachers. And that's it's creating the systemic takeover that it's claiming to fight. And that's why, and I think we've talked about preemptive narratives before, like Jim Crow 2.0. One of our first real interactions on Twitter was that, talking about that. It was, Jim Crow, when they come out with Jim Crow 2.0, DEI is segregating students in living quarters. They're segregating students in the classroom. They're segregating people in professional development and all the trainings they do. That's Jim Crow 1.0. But then they use this other moniker about ID for voting, and they say, Jim Crow 2.0. So I'm going to beat this up over and over again. My dad used to say, son, you could take your hand and put it on a hot iron. Just smack it right there. It's going to hurt really, really bad. But eventually, if you do it enough, you won't feel it anymore. That's what the goal is. It's like we're going to take what could be the most effective slogans against us that would actually describe what we're doing, and we're going to preempt them in the public square, beat them up, and then when you try to use it against us, we're just going to go, well, what aboutism?
Yes.
Right?
They do this all the time. I'm so happy you're talking about this. They take anything that could be used effectively against them and they twist it the same way that an individual who is a narcissist or a psychopath does. That when it's an individual, it's called DARVO. It's a deny and reverse victim order. Mm-hmm. And they get out there ahead of it and they accuse you of everything that they're doing to you, so that when you try to say this person's stalking me, they've already said you're stalking them. It's like it's this crazy sort of the two Spider-Mans fighting, right? They do this on a ideological level and in a meme level and with the media. And I'm so happy you're talking about it, because I've seen it. It's not just with the woke stuff, but just political stuff. They'll take phrases like, when there was a lot of question in the last election over election integrity, and people wanted to know, like, we need to do audits. We're not sure if we trust this. And this seems like it might be, I saw people who were questioning the results using the phrase "the big lie," and which has a historical context. And it, the Hitler, talked about if you want to get lots of people to believe a lie, it has to be a big lie. It can't be a small lie. It has to be so big that normal people can't imagine that you would lie about something so big. So people were saying this, and what did they do? They took it. They took the big lie and they put it in I still see it in the paper. I still see them calling, they flipped it. They said the idea that there was any problems with the election was the big lie. It's like, I see what you're doing here.
Well, and they reinforced that with all the Sidney Powell crap, right? The Times article talking about the fortification of the election. That was if there was any major attempt to artificially move the election, that was it. And it was happening years and months before the election. And they put that out there so quickly after, right? It's like, if I come out there, it's like a mea culpa. So I got John Kennedy on my wall. I'm a president nerd. So I got Republicans and Democrats, just so everyone knows. But because I like to study leadership. But he was endeared to the American people after the Bay of Pigs more than you would think, because he came out and said, it's my fault. Look what I did. And that was after the fact. But what they've done is kind of taken that endearment and said, okay, I'm going to take that, what is actual messing with the outcome of the election through artificial means that have nothing to do with necessarily the voting on the day, right? I'm talking about, whether you're talking about the New York Post article that they knocked down, or, the laws they were changing underneath the whatever. And I'm going to come out and just admit to all that and paint it in a way that is endearing to the people who really like it and like the outcome. And
I see.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah, call it fortification. And therefore it is not illegal. It's not unethical. It's not deception. It's not manipulation. It's virtuous.
Yes.
Right?
They get to say, we did all of that. It's a good thing.
Look how and look. And then later on, what they'll say, if anyone else tries that, they'll flip it around again. Yeah. And that's where James and I credit James for so much, because he was doing this when nobody else really was, and has just the sheer amount of hours that he sits down and just talks into a microphone. So you can listen for 45 minutes and grab a hold of a nugget of it and really understand, but Marxism is an thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? That's the whole goal. And you can call it like a meta-modern, I studied this in my graduate degree, but it's called oscillation, that the truth is never, instead of finding thesis, the thesis is a constant oscillation between the thesis and antithesis. So the synthesis is that constant. So the truth can never be nailed down. It is as we say it is, and it's what gives us power. That's the only thing that truth is, and that's why parents' heads spin when you're trying to explain this stuff to them. And not that they're stupid, because they are absolutely not. They're not stupid. They know something's wrong, but this is designed to keep you off kilter. It's like judo. Yeah. Right. So judo, it's different than other sports because it uses the person's body against them. Right. It uses their momentum against them. It's not about striking. It's about defending and dispatching. Right. If somebody comes after you, you use the force of them, you grab them and you throw them over your head. Right. So that's kind of what they do to you with your language, and just pinpointing it down to, hey, if there's a person there telling your administrators and your teachers that they have to include this in math or history or English or biology or engineering or anything, that specific act must be removed. And parents understand that. It's something that they can grab a hold of, and it gives you a bureaucratic target. You can target the managerial class in your school. The more administrators there are in your school, the worse off your school is. And that has to be good. And I've taught in public, private, college. The more administrators there are, the worse off your school is. in my experience, because it just becomes a micromanaging effect. And yeah, go ahead.
It's a total bureaucracy. I remember, I don't know what it's at now, but a few years ago, I saw an article about the University of Texas here in Austin, and their DEI department was 100 people, more than 100 people working for the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity office. Those are not educators. And they're expensive, and they're sucking the blood out of parents. They're sucking the blood out of education. They're living off the largesse. People want to talk about why did education get so expensive, and look at how many people are living off of it.
Yeah,
who are not teaching your kids anything. Yeah,
well, and that's they are teaching your kids something, though. It's just they're doing it by proxy, and that I'm getting ready to put out some videos and stuff about how they actually teach people to get DEI jobs, because it's basically a leveraging of a manufactured problem, right? They never have to justify it. Well, of course there's racism, accept it. Because there's racism, you need me, and I will end your racism. But it can never really be ended.
No, so because then I'm out of a job.
Right. Well, no, but they say it. They said the work never ends.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's always more to do, because they can move that oscillation from these. It can always change, and you cannot question them. So it's very sneaky, but you can boil it down to very practical matters. But the problem I'm seeing is that you still have the fear factor of whether it's a politician, and the people take, especially like in a place like Oklahoma, Texas, I think you get, and I think this is true everywhere, but if you have a leader that will be bold and come out and say, no more, I'm going after DEI, just like Rufo did with CRT, which got to the president. He did it, and that exploded it, because you had the leader come out and say, nope, CRT. It would have been much harder to pejorativize that phrase the way that we've been able to do. It's an accurate pejorativization, if that's a word, but it's an accurate moniker. But that would have been much harder to do had we not had the president of the United States, for all of his flaws, sit up there and go, yeah, this is wrong. And he didn't do it because he understood it. He didn't. I mean, when he got the question about it in the debate, it was very, well, but that's not his job as an administrator, or as the top executive. He's used to going, okay, I trust you. You're giving me information. This looks wrong to me. I'm going to bullet point it. Yeah, here's how we get rid of it. Okay, next thing, right? That's a good administrator. But that would have been much harder to do if he wouldn't have done that. So what I'm trying to encourage parents to do is be very pointed about what it is you want to accomplish, and point that at the administrative body who it needs to be pointed at. Because recently our Secretary of Education, his name is Ryan Walters, great guy. Met with him a bunch of times. He was a teacher of the year, taught for 10 years in Oklahoma schools. Good guy. He recently wrote a column for Fox News, and the title of it was, "Hey teachers, stop going woke." Okay, that's a good message, but I had an issue with it because it ignores the apparatus that makes the teachers do it in order to put food on their tables. Right. And I'm telling you, at least half. There's some that are true believers, but I really don't think that that's more than 20%. The rest of the teachers just want to be teachers. And we've been trained, over the course, I mean, I've been in education 20 years. Professional development is something you endure so you can get back to your classroom. Right? 9 times out of 10. Okay. It's something you endure to say, okay. Now can I go teach music? I've got to go prep my choir to do contests. Right. Teachers, that's most of them, but now they're starting to see that this is more invasive, and they cannot afford to risk their jobs to tell this no when you have an entire apparatus designed to enforce it and make you do it, or you'll lose your job. Because that's the other thing about school districts. If they want you gone, they will find a reason for you to be gone. They'll invent it. They'll put you in situations, and this is predating even critical theory influx. But you'll see it's like, oh well, he's not really doing this. You know, we're going to really watch him, and any tiny mistake he makes or she makes or whomever, we're going to, you know, write you up for that. Right. And so, and then enough of those, they've got the documentation needed in a right to work state, at least, to dismiss you.
Right.
They're doing that with teachers that have been teaching for 30 years. I know 3 that were Oklahoma State Teachers of the Year, that at the very last 2 years of their, or at least for their districts, they were Teachers of the Year, but one was the actual State Teacher of the Year. But in the very last 2 years, you know, they're towards the end of retirement. They're getting put on, you know, plans to, you know, remediate their teaching in the classroom because they aren't teaching what the standards are or what the lesson plans need to say, you know. And so it's an effort to remove those older teachers who actually may have some pull, right, in the classroom, and get them out. So, hey, look, there's your example. You know,
it's just like with the cops that you were mentioning.
Yeah, like it's the same thing.
Anyone who dissents, and you're seeing good teachers, good cops, some of them are self-selecting out. They're leaving. I have a friend, a lot are leaving because they can't teach. They're being expected to become preachers, social justice preachers in the classroom, giving this moral, it's not moral, but it's a kind of moral instruction and this belief system. And I have a friend here, her brother taught Texas history his whole life. Excellent teacher. He had to leave. He wasn't allowed to teach it anymore. You know, it's become so invasive. So when you give parents, go ahead.
No. You finish.
When you give parents, you're trying to give them some very specific, pointed, concise things to do. And so one of those is to say, if you have a DEI committee in your school, you have to get rid of it.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just committees. Yeah, these are entire funded offices, just like at UT, just like at OU. You know, literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of salaries, you know, going just to enforce the ideology. So I think what's hard to pinpoint this is that it's like whack-a-mole. Well, then let's get a big hammer and whack the whole mole. You know what I mean? And that's the apparatus. If you had, when Ryan Walters said, hey, teachers, quit going woke, good message. But how about officials take your considerable, you know, bully pulpit and point it at the administrative apparatus that doesn't have free speech protection, because you're talking about schools, right? And doesn't instruct, but intimidates and discriminates in an effort to create anti-racist policies and then enforce them, right? And anti-racist being, you know, redistribution based on, you know, by discrimination, whether that is. So my message is defund DEI, remove those offices, and we will be, I think we'll be more than halfway towards our goal. And then understand that, yes, they will change their name, but if you outline in a bill, right? Okay. Any office that whose job it is explicitly to embed any ideology into each specific subject cannot be in our school district, cannot be in our state schools, you know. But here's the other issue with that, and this is why I'm concerned. I've done a lot of research, and Texas and Oklahoma, you know Richard Lowry?
I don't.
He's the UT professor. Chris Rufo tweeted him out, basically called out. He's at UT and basically called out during a Zoom meeting about DEI. Basically said to the administrators, "This is crap." I mean, he's an awesome guy and he's based as all hell. Okay, I mean,
I should know him.
Fearless. Then. Yes, you should know him. You should get him on your show because he is fearless. He's tenured, so that helps. But we've been talking back and forth. There is a lot of money in these diversity programs, and there are a lot of conservatives who claim to be against it that are profiting off of it.
Of course. Yes.
And my message, if I have any to those who may be doing that, is performative opposition is no opposition at all. If you're going to come out and, oh, well, look, we signed a bill, but we aren't enforcing it because the people you're appointing to actually enforce these things, because that's the thing that people don't understand too. And this goes at schools as well. There's the law, they make it. At the legislative level, the governor signs it. But the enforcement of the law is in public policy. And that is run by people appointed by these people. So these appointments, whether you're talking about your boards of regents, your university presidents, your DEI officers, your Title IX officers, all of these things, they are actually doing the job of wrapping the public around what the laws say to do. A law is no good if it's not enforced. Or it can be very bad if it's enforced the wrong way. You know what I mean? And so understanding that even your conservative politicians use that, you can call it the swamp, you can call it the managerial class, you can call it bureaucracy, it's all the same thing. Mm-hmm. They just look at them and go, well, look at those bad people in these bad offices. Well, why are you appointing people to the OU Board of Regents who are running companies whose job and is making money off of this stuff spreading throughout the schools? You just put somebody in charge of that cannot be removed except, after you appoint them, right? Or fired, and the public's not going to look at them. They're just going to be now under the radar. They're actually doing the job, and you're claiming to be against this stuff. But you appointed this person who's going to enforce the exact opposite of what you claim to be against. It's infuriating. And that's been what I'm also trying to get parents to understand, is the devil is in the details, and it's always a personnel issue. It's always a personnel issue. So go to your Secretary of Education and say, yes, teachers will stop going woke when you give them the cover to do it. When you say, nope, I'm going after that administrator who's making you do this. I'm going after the office that houses that administrator and funds that administrator to do this. If the governor would come out and do that tomorrow, I'm against DEI, defund DEI, you would see this massive wave of people just go, yes, they would rally around it. Instead of me sitting out here and the voice in the wilderness going, guys, school choice is great. It's a good idea. Okay. And I understand the soundness behind it, but you selling it as a fix for this is you're misdiagnosing, and it's not going to be a fix. And then you're still going to have this apparatus. And I know I jumped around a lot there, but
no, but I think I'm thinking of if they were to defund DEI, so you get the Secretary of Education to say, we're against this. This is racist. By the way, that's my advice for parents when you're talking about it. If you go to your school board or whatever, if you're trying to get to root out DEI out of your school district, all you need to say is this is a racist ideology, and we should not be teaching it to kids. We are teaching kids to judge and treat each other differently on the basis of race and sex and sexuality, and they should not be doing that. That's immoral. We're not teaching this. So that's it. But if they're going and trying to do that, let's say what you said happens, you have a governor or secretary of education who says, we're doing it, we're defunding it, we're getting rid of all these different DI offices, these boards, these departments. It makes me think of ticks falling off of a dog's body. Did you ever see one of those? I don't know. I grew up in the woods. Those big mama ticks, you sometimes have to put a lighter on it to get them to let go and release. It's like all of this, because they just are sucking the blood of students, of education, of all the money that their parents are pouring in. So,
and of the subject matter. I mean, everything. It's just everything. It's offensive.
I'm sorry I gave the tick analogy. That's disgusting.
No, I think no, but it's symbiotic, because just think of, I like to use the New York Times example of what you're talking about. The New York Times has always been left-leaning, but it had such a stellar reputation that it's the perfect example of what DEI or the woke ideology is designed to do. Because now, if you really read the New York Times, it has no actual credibility, or not. I mean, when you have Bari Weiss leave the New York Times, okay, and for the reason she did, how she did, and then you go back and actually read what was happening, especially during that point, right after George Floyd and all of that, its credibility shot. But what it did was it took over the host.
Yes.
Right? It left the walls intact, but it took over that systemic reputation and weaponized it. Yeah, it does. It's parasitic ideology, and it demands that you don't think for yourself in order to be good. And so, and religions have done that all over the place, and whether it's Christianity or Islam or everything can be weaponized that way. But this has no virtue to it. Like, Christianity has a virtue to it that actually lines up with Islam in many different ways, or Buddhism. I think Jonathan Haidt talks about ancient wisdoms a lot, and you can do a lot to source what is a true wisdom and what is actually true in nature and humanity, right? By saying, okay, well, what did Buddhism say that agrees with Christianity, that agrees with Islam, that agrees with, and I'm not saying you have to be, accepting of all faiths. I'm personally a Christian, and I believe that what I believe is a Christian, but I can recognize the same wisdom coming from.
You can see where things overlap. Yes.
Right. This ideology has none of that. It has nothing in common. It's theory.
Inverted. It's completely inverted.
Yeah, it has nothing in common. And so if, and I kind of forgot where I was going with this, but
you're saying it's parasitic in some religions.
Yes, it's parasitic. Well. And just like you said, if it functions as a religion and a moral code, then you cannot have an office to enforce it.
Yes.
Especially a taxpayer-funded one. And I talked to James about this a lot, and he came out and said it just recently in some of his podcasts, but I think this has all of the aspects of a religion and could be classified as one. And if we did that, then you have the atheist model that was weaponized in the 60s to remove Christianity from schools and from the public square. Why not use that against them? You know what I mean? Because it's like, and I think you could say that, okay, just like you had mentioned a little bit ago, you can't have an office of Christianity, and dogma and doctrine, right? You can't do that. Right. Well, you can't do it for Marxism either. Yeah. You can't do it for diversity either. But they're really crafty. Well, it's not a religion. It doesn't, it's just you have to do it to be good.
It's really crafty. I was fooled for so long. I mean, I would say it's not too late to leave. I was in it for 2 decades. Anybody can come out of it. Well, not the ones who are in bad faith. Maybe they'll only come out if the money and the power they can get it somewhere else.
And that's ultimately what ticks me off about a lot of the Republicans and the conservatives, because they see green, and they are of the mind that a rising tide lifts all ships. I've heard this over and over again. The pendulum will swing back, and it's like, this rising tide is going to overtake you. because it's designed to turn your pendulum into a ratchet and put a weight on your back and sink you underneath the wave, so to take it. But that's, and people that are in power right now, your older Gen Xers and your younger boomers and those, they're stuck in this 90s kind of early 2000s mindset of we can spend our way out of this. If we make enough money while this is happening and take advantage of the crisis, the free market will eventually work this out. But as Vivek Ramaswamy and James Lindsay and Glenn Beck and all of these others are telling you, this ESG model, we don't need to go into this, but this is funding this movement in education, and it's designed to break the free market. It's already doing it. It will do it. So you cannot rely on a free market to save you if the market's not free. And that's what I'm telling. DEI is doing this in these institutions that set these kinds of things up, like ESG and the equity funds and all of that. If it were not for the work of DEI in all of these places, the funding for this would not be there. So it's like a circle. It just feeds itself. That's what they mean when they talk about sustainability. It's like theory, praxis, funding, theory, praxis, funding, theory, praxis, funding. And it just keeps going and going and going and until you're overtaken by it. So I honestly believe if we defunded DEI, all the ticks would fall off. Just use your thing.
If we put the lighter on it.
Yep, exactly. So
let me ask you, Mark. I know I don't have you for long.
Yeah.
What is it? I always am curious about this. What is it about you think that helped you to see through this ideology for what it really is?
Music.
How do you mean?
Why do you know the words to God Bless America?
Yes.
Do you know the words to My Country 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty, right? Why do you know those words?
Repetition in childhood.
From your childhood. God gave us music so we can pray without words. It's a quote, one of my favorite quotes. I'm a choir director, so I get to use the music and the words, right? What you sing helps shape who you are. You and I were raised to believe after the civil rights movement. I'm born in '84, right? And I was born in an era where it was accepted that being racist is wrong and discrimination is racism in action, and to look at somebody and judge them by the color of their skin is the wrong. And I learned that because of My Country 'Tis of Thee, because of, I learned that because of music. And this is what I also trying to get people to understand, because music is such a power. Jordan Peterson just talked about it. It's such a powerful force because it speaks to the soul regardless of the language you speak.
Yes.
And if that is weaponized with words and images and ideology against the person who's singing it in their mind, it will never leave them. And so unlike us, the only reason we're fighting back right now is because of the songs we sing, because of the things we learn from 0 to 6, from 10 to 14 to all. It becomes imbued in a like a swirl. You ever seen like ice cream, right? The fudge, you can't remove it. I'm sorry, I'm a little hungry, but you cannot remove it. And what really tipped me off on it was when I was in a class called Music Theory Pedagogy in the 21st Century, and the lecture of the first class was basically that music theory is white supremacist. It's white supremacy in action. And as an example, he uses several different things, but he demeaned the very basis of the songs that I had been taught, not just through my studies, but when I was a child, that I know are virtuous,
Yes.
that hold a human love message throughout them. And you're using an anti-contextual, anti-factual, anti-rational, anti-racist lens to impugn generations and centuries of the beauty of the universal language.
Yeah.
So my music education is largely gone, and it's being weaponized against our children and against society. And the kids that are being taught this in schools right now will not have the basis you and I do. They won't have the "My Country 'Tis of Thee." They won't have those things, which means people have to understand that this battle isn't about today. It's about 20 years from now.
Yes.
Because these kids are being taught that in order to do good and be good, they must vote. And so it's like I told an elder leader around here the other day. It was kind of a tense conversation, but I said to him, I said, in 7 years, either you will be gone or your generation will lose its power on the voting block. And it's not going to be the millennials or the older Gen Xers that take over that. It's going to be the 20 to 27-year-olds that have now been trained up in this, because they will vote at every level. They will come out every time, because it's like going to church.
Yes.
The tithe is in the ballot box. The anti-racist CRT DEI tithe is in the ballot box. You implant it, and that is your contrition. And it only lasts for a while, but that's it. And that means that apparatus is going to outvote you in 7 years. And all the stuff you're trying to do right now, with whether it's school choice or whatever, if you don't attack the apparatus, we're running out of time. So that's how I came about this, was understanding that this ideology is perverting the universal language.
Yes.
And it's redefining morality on a musical level. And you see that throughout the Soviet. I don't want to go into all, but it's a travesty, and it's heartbreaking. Because music saved my life.
I'm so glad that you talked about this. And and you're right. It's that verse: "Those who speak evil for good and good for evil." That it's everything is flipped. It's taking something beautiful and pure and joyful, and perversion is the right word, turning it upside down, sucking what makes it delightful out of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sucking out that our common humanity, the things that bring us together, and replacing it with this divisive, no, it's your whatever identity groups you're in. That's what matters. We're going to make new songs about this, about oppression. No. Mark, well, let's.
Sorry, you're right. And we parents, don't be afraid. The only thing you have to fear is fear itself.
Yes.
Because if you stand up and you point your courage is not the absence of fear. It's the overcoming of it. So be courageous, be bold, and point it at the right direction. And you can't be stopped. Mothers and fathers will save the country. So
I 100% agree. Thank you, sir. It's not the absence of fear. It's overcoming it. You're going to have that fear. It's normal. Overcome it. It's important. Your kids are important. The future's important. Mark, I want to talk to you again when we're both, we're not so crunched for time. I so appreciate you coming by. Can you just tell people if they want to talk to you, if they have questions, if they want to find out more, where can they find you online?
My Twitter handle is at Acts Against CRT. That's ACS Against CRT, all one word. And I have a Substack at UnWokable.substack.com. And I have a YouTube channel, which is just UnWokable. And you can find me there. And I do a lot of local things, but I'm starting to branch out now. So,
So Oklahoma people, definitely hit him up, but everyone
yes,
else
please.
too. And we'll put all of that in the description below the video. So if you're here watching this on YouTube or wherever you're watching it, you should be able to get that information below. Thank you, Mark. Have a nice day. Very nice to finally talk to you.
Thanks. Bye.
Cool.